Rain came in steady sheets that turned the ground into a slick, adhesive mud, making every movement cost more than it should have. In the late months of the Pacific War, forward areas were never truly quiet, but the sound here was dulled by weather and jungle. Engines throttled down too fast. Metal clinked beneath tarpaulins. Orders were shouted and lost in the downpour. The airstrip itself was a narrow scar cut through green, kept open by constant labor and constant compromise. There was no spare space and no spare time. Men worked with their heads down, aware that the next aircraft could arrive within minutes and the next patrol could be stepping off before dusk. In places like this, war was not a sequence of dramatic moments. It was a cycle of arrivals and departures, driven by the simple requirement that everything be done before the light failed. The entire routine depended on habit. Habit kept men moving when they were exhausted. Habit prevented mistakes when attention thinned. Habit made a crewman reach for a drop strap without thinking, made a loader drag a crate clear of a wheel track, made someone lift a pack by the handle and move it aside so the path stayed open. In Allied forces, this reflex was not kindness. It was discipline. Men were trained to secure equipment, clear hazards, and maintain order because disorder killed. A loose line could foul a propeller. A crate left in the wrong place could break a leg. A pack left in a thoroughfare could delay a departure, and delay in bad weather could mean an aircraft did not return. That was the logic of the strip. It was understood by everyone. And that was why the warning felt wrong the first time it was heard. It was not delivered as an order. No officer read it out. It came from someone who had been there longer, someone who spoke with the tired certainty of a man repeating something that no longer needed explanation. If you see Australian gear lying around, do not touch it. Do not move it. Do not open it. Leave it exactly where it is. The words were spoken plainly, without emphasis, as if they belonged alongside watch the rotors or stay clear of the wheels. There was no story attached, no justification offered. It was simply a rule. Touch it and die. Or, if not die, then regret it in the rain and noise. It could have sounded like superstition. Forward areas bred rumors, but the tone resisted dismissal. It was not delivered with humor or menace. It was delivered like an instruction that had already been paid for. Men hearing it for the first time tried to reconcile it with their training. They asked themselves what it meant. Did the Australians carry sensitive documents? Was their equipment unfamiliar? Was this some private arrangement with their own supply personnel? The mind looked for an explanation that preserved the normal order. An Allied rucksack should not be dangerous. The idea itself implied something out of place. But the forward area was full of contradictions. Men were thin from malaria and dysentery. Insects rose from puddles and clouds. Steel rusted faster than it could be cleaned. Plywood warped overnight. The jungle pressed inward, as if waiting to reclaim the strip the moment work stopped. This was a landscape that punished assumptions. You could follow procedure and still lose a vehicle to mud. You could do everything correctly and still wake to soaked supplies. The war here forced men to accept that logic often bent under pressure. Still, the warning about the packs stood apart because it demanded men suppress their most ingrained reflex. See an obstruction, clear it. Not everyone obeyed at first. That was not failure. It was routine colliding with time pressure. On a strip like this, there was no pause built in for reflection. When an aircraft rolled in, it demanded immediate action. When a patrol loaded out, speed mattered. When weather shifted, decisions had to be made quickly. In those moments, men acted first and processed later. The Australians came and went without ceremony. Small groups emerged from the tree line, moving as if they already knew the rhythm of the place and had no intention of interrupting it. Their uniforms were darkened by sweat and rain, gear stained by mud and rot. Their faces were set, not defiant but burdened, as if they carried something that could not be put down. They did not drift into the center of activity. They did not ask for help. They placed their packs deliberately, often separate from American gear, and stepped away as if distance itself mattered. To the Americans watching, the separation felt deliberate and unfriendly. In a war that depended on cooperation, creating a pocket of untouchable space seemed unreasonable. The Australians offered no explanation. That silence did more than words could have. It invited interpretation, and most interpretations missed the point. The work continued. Aircraft arrived and departed. The rain eased and returned. Men kept moving because stopping was not an option. Somewhere in that movement, the rule was tested. It happened through an ordinary action. A pack lay where it should not have been, too close to where fuel cans needed to pass. Straps spilled across the mud. Canvas sagged under rainwater. It looked like any other pack. In that moment, there was nothing to distinguish it. An American reached down, thinking only of clearing the path. His hand closed on a strap, the same way it had countless times before, and in that instant the rule revealed its purpose. The sound was sharp and close, not the rolling concussion of a bomb, but a hard crack that cut through the rain. The effect was immediate. Movement stopped. Tools froze mid-air. Shouts died unfinished. For a brief moment, there was only the rain and the awareness that something irreversible had happened. The strip was no longer just a workplace. It was a place where routine could injure you. The specifics mattered less than the realization. Whether the device was lethal or maiming, standardized or improvised, intended as a trap or a denial measure, those details belonged to later discussions. On the strip, the lesson was simple. The warning had been literal. The Australians did not rush forward. They did not apologize or explain. Their response was controlled. They moved deliberately, checked the pack in the immediate area, and treated the incident not as an accident but as the expected result of a boundary being crossed. Their expressions carried no surprise, only confirmation. This was the moment when the idea of shared procedure began to fracture. If Australian equipment could be dangerous by design, then they were fighting under assumptions different from everyone else's. They were solving a problem that American doctrine did not prioritize. They were accepting a risk that Allied systems were designed to avoid. Afterward, the rain seemed louder. Work resumed, but cautiously. Eyes tracked the ground. Habit hesitated. A pack was no longer just a pack. Gear had to be identified before it was handled. Space opened around Australian equipment, instinctively, like the space given to exposed wiring. The warning spread quickly now, stripped of phrasing and explanation. Don't touch their gear. Leave it alone. There was no time to sit and reflect. Aircraft still needed to fly. Daylight was fading. The rule lodged itself in the mind like grit. It did not fit the narrative of Allies standing shoulder to shoulder, but it had asserted itself through consequence. Once established, the rule integrated into routine. It did not require reinforcement from headquarters. It survived because it carried weight. Somewhere behind, it was a logic shaped by operating in environments where anything left behind would be used against you. The men on the strip did not yet know that logic. They only knew that the rule existed because something had already happened, and because the conditions that produced it still held. And once a rule like that entered routine, it reshaped how people saw the men who enforced it. The Australian was not introduced. He simply appeared at the edge of the working area, pack on his shoulders, rain running from his hat. To the Americans nearby, he looked misplaced, as if unsure where to stand. He was lean to the point of gauntness, uniform darkened until it merged with the mud. He did not relax. He stood as if still measuring distance and risk. An American crew chief noticed him automatically. That was his role, to keep things moving, to solve small problems before they slowed the strip. To him, the Australian looked like one more problem that could be resolved with a word and a gesture. He stepped closer and offered help. The Australian did not answer immediately. He did not move. He looked at the crew chief steadily. The pause was long enough to feel deliberate. Around them, engines idled and men shouted instructions. In that noise, the silence felt intentional. When he spoke, it was only to say no. The refusal landed awkwardly. To the crew chief, it felt unnecessary. He tried again, gesturing toward the pack, explaining he could carry part of the load. The response was the same. No. The Australian shifted slightly, placing his body between the pack and the reaching hand. To observers, it looked like stubbornness. In a cooperative system, refusing help felt like rejection. Men nearby noticed and drew conclusions. Someone muttered. Someone else ignored it. The Australian waited. What the Americans could not see was calculation. The refusal was not personal. It was about control. Every interaction introduced uncertainty. Every unfamiliar hand near his gear added variables he could not account for. The pack carried more than supplies. It carried traces of where he had been and where he would go. If it were opened, even briefly, he would have to assume compromise. Help meant exposure, and exposure carried consequences that extended beyond the strip. He had learned this over time, through patrols that ran long and extractions that came late or not at all. In his environment, anything dropped was examined. The enemy did not need to capture a man to learn from him. Fragments accumulated. Patterns emerged. Routes once safe became watched. Denial became as important as movement. The American crew chief operated within a different system. Supplies were standardized. Losses were logged and replaced. Help was rarely dangerous. His instincts were shaped by depth and redundancy. To him, the Australian's behavior felt unnecessarily isolating. That isolation was real. The Australian understood the social cost of refusal. He accepted it because he saw no alternative. His responsibility extended beyond himself, beyond the strip, to patrols yet to move through the same terrain. Friendliness was a luxury he could not always afford. When directed onward, he moved carefully. He set his pack down deliberately, checked the ground, stepped back. The Americans adjusted without comment. The rule echoed now not as warning but explanation. The question lingered after he disappeared back toward the tree line. What kind of war required a man to refuse help to protect others? The answer lay earlier, before the rule reached the strip. The decision had not been made under fire. It emerged gradually, through repetition. Patrols went out and returned thinner. Patrols went out with thinner in fighters, and patrols went out and returned thinner. Routes were reused. Extraction points shifted. Each time, something was left behind. None of it decisive alone. Together, it formed a pattern. The Australians learned that the jungle returned what was dropped, slowly, inevitably. Fragments were studied. Over time, those fragments aligned. Contact appeared where it had not before. The jungle remembered. This was not a problem firepower could solve. It was information leakage. The Australians lacked the depth to absorb it. Each patrol depended on the integrity of the last. Denial became essential. If equipment could not always be recovered, it could not be left intact. Burning drew attention. Dismantling took time. Carrying everything assumed perfect extraction. None of those assumptions held. Rigging packs was not aggression. It was denial. The goal was not to kill but to prevent use. The device needed certainty, not power. Even the risk of friendly harm was weighed against the certainty of enemy exploitation. This inverted Allied instinct. Recovery and assistance were foundational. By making their own gear hazardous, the Australians enforced restraint rather than trust. Once adopted, the practice could not be selective. Inconsistency would teach the enemy and allies alike. The cost was isolation. Assistance had to be refused. Distance had to be maintained. Cooperation became awkward. The benefit was invisible. For Australians, it meant constant awareness of their own gear. For Allies, it meant hesitation where speed was valued. The battlefield, as they saw it, extended beyond contact. Information was decisive. The incident on the strip was confirmation, not origin. Consequence preserved the rule. The rule did not generate recognition. It produced absence. Patrols not compromised. Ambush not set. These outcomes were not celebrated. Over time, behavior adapted. Men stepped around packs without comment. Offers of help faded. Cooperation continued with distance. As conditions changed, the rule receded but did not vanish. When the war ended, it was not preserved. It did not fit post-war narratives. Its success left no record. What remained was not legend, but a quiet example of war fought at the margins. Not with spectacle, but with narrow decisions under pressure. The rain returned. The strip eventually disappeared back into jungle. Metal rusted. Canvas rotted. The rule lived on only in memory. It was never celebrated. It remained unspoken. But for those who learned it, it remained clear. Some of the most important decisions of the war were the ones no one wanted to remember, because remembering them meant admitting how narrow the margins had been